The Mongols had destroyed cities from China to Baghdad. They had broken kingdoms that once looked untouchable, and by the end of the 13th century, their horsemen were riding toward Delhi. Waiting for them was a ruler almost as ruthless as they were, Alauddin Khalji. His family came from the Khalji people, whose ancestors had lived for generations in the lands of modern-day Afghanistan. He ruled the Delhi Sultanate. The Sultanate had grown out of the Ghurid Empire, which come from modern-day Afghanistan. He did not come to the throne through inheritance or loyalty. He bought an army with captured treasure, lured his own uncle into a trap, and took power through murder. And then this same man spent the next decade defending the Delhi Sultanate from some of the most dangerous Mongol invasions it ever faced. It is less the story of a hero beating a villain than of a usurper who built a state strong enough to survive the Mongols. Before he was Sultan, Alauddin was already part of the ruling family. His uncle, Alauddin Khalji, had founded the Khalji dynasty and put him in charge of Kara, an important province east of Delhi. Alauddin trusted him, and that trust would eventually cost him his life. Ambition alone wasn't enough to take a throne. Alauddin needed soldiers, supporters, and money. So in 1296, without fully telling the Sultan what he intended, he led a fast raid south toward Devagiri, one of the wealthiest cities in the Deccan. It succeeded beyond anything he could have expected. He came back with a fortune in gold, jewels, horses, and other treasure, but he didn't take it to Delhi. He brought it to Kara, where it could reward soldiers and pull powerful men over to his side. His uncle should have seen the danger. Some of Jalaluddin's advisors warned him not to go near his nephew without a strong army. But the old Sultan believed the young man was frightened and ashamed of having acted without permission. Alauddin sent apologetic messages and begged forgiveness, and Jalaluddin chose mercy. He traveled to meet him on the banks of the Ganges. Alauddin came forward and bowed. Jalaluddin lifted him up and embraced him. Then Alauddin's men attacked. The Sultan was killed beside the river by the nephew he had raised and protected. Alauddin took his treasure, gathered more followers, and marched on Delhi. By the end of 1296, the throne was his. Winning a throne and keeping it are two different things, and Alauddin knew exactly how exposed he was. He had betrayed his own family, and every ambitious noble around him now had proof that a ruler could be removed. Rebellions followed. Relatives plotted. Governors watched for weakness. He responded not by courting loyalty, but by making rebellion hard to organize. He planted spies among the nobles, restricted the private gatherings where conspiracies grew, tightened his grip on land and revenue, and expanded the army, demanding accurate records of soldiers and horses so commanders couldn't draw pay for men and animals that didn't exist. The policies were harsh, but paranoia wasn't the whole reason for them. A much larger danger was coming from the northwest. Genghis Khan himself had been dead for around 70 years. His empire had split into rival branches, but his descendants still ruled enormous territories. The Mongols, now threatening Delhi, came mainly from the Chagatai world of Central Asia, and they were not ghosts from the past. They were organized armies under experienced commanders, and they had already spent decades pushing into Punjab and the frontier lands of the Sultanate. In 1297 and 1298, a Mongol force entered Punjab and moved toward the Sutlej. Alauddin sent an army under commanders including his brother Ulugh Khan and the celebrated general Zafar Khan, and near Jaran-Manjur, the Delhi army caught the invaders and beat them. It was an important victory, but it didn't end the threat. The Mongols came back. In 1299, a much larger army under Kutlug Khawaja moved straight for Delhi, and this time Alauddin went out to face them in person. The two armies met at Kili, only a short distance from the capital. Alauddin seems to have planned to fight cautiously. He didn't want his commanders charging off from the main force and falling into the kind of trap the Mongols had sprung on enemies all across Asia. Zafar Khan ignored the caution. He hit the Mongol left wing, drove it back, and chased the retreating soldiers, and for a moment it looked like a brilliant victory. Then the trap closed. He had gone too far from the main army. The Mongol rear guard surrounded his force, and he was killed along with many of his men. The Mongols withdrew anyway. Their commander had been badly wounded and died on the way home. Delhi had survived. But Kili was not the clean, glorious victory that later storytellers sometimes make it out to be. Alauddin had held the capital, but one of his best generals was dead, and the Mongols had shown they could ride almost to Delhi itself. 4 years later, they came closer still. In 1303, Alauddin was away campaigning at Chittor, with parts of his army deployed elsewhere, when a Mongol commander named Taragai saw the opening and moved fast toward Delhi. Alauddin hurried back, but he didn't have time to gather the army he wanted. Rather than meet the Mongols in a great open battle, he took up a fortified position on the plain of Siri. For roughly 2 months, the Mongols stayed outside Delhi, raiding the suburbs and pinning the Sultan inside his camp. This was probably the most dangerous moment of his reign. The ruler, later remembered for stopping the Mongols, was, for a time, boxed in near his own capital. But they couldn't break his position, and eventually they withdrew as suddenly as they had come. Alauddin had survived again, and this time survival wasn't enough for him. The siege had shown him exactly what would happen if Delhi were ever caught unprepared, so he rebuilt the state around the threat. He strengthened the old forts along the northwestern routes and built new defensive positions, kept experienced commanders and troops closer to the frontier, expanded the standing army around Delhi, and turned Siri into a fortified center of power. Keeping that many soldiers was enormously expensive, and his solution was one of the strangest economic experiments of the medieval world. He fixed prices in Delhi. Grain, cloth, horses, livestock, and other goods sold at rates set by the government. Merchants were watched, hoarding was punished, officials and informers checked the markets, and government grain stores kept supplies moving into the capital. The point wasn't charity. Alauddin wanted a large army without paying wages so high that the treasury collapsed, and if food and equipment stayed cheap, soldiers could live on lower salaries. The market controls, the spies, the taxes, the branding of horses, the army records. They can look like separate policies, but they were parts of one machine. Alauddin was turning Delhi into a state built for permanent war. The test came in 1305. Another Mongol army crossed into the Sultanate, pushed through Punjab, and traveled deep into northern India. Alauddin sent forces under Malik Nayak and other commanders to intercept them, and near Amroha, the Delhi army crushed the invasion and captured the Mongol leaders Ali Beg and Tartak. Later attacks were beaten too, and Delhi's forces began pushing the danger back toward the frontier. The Mongols hadn't suddenly gone weak, and Alauddin hadn't defeated the whole Mongol world. Trouble inside the Chagatai Khanate also took some of the pressure off India. But the cost of attacking the Delhi Sultanate had climbed a long way. Its forts were stronger, its armies larger. Its commanders now knew how to fight steppe cavalry. By the later years of Alauddin's reign, the invasions that had once reached the capital could no longer do so in the same way. So was Alauddin Khalji, the man who stopped the Mongols. In one sense, yes. During his reign, Mongol armies reached the outskirts of Delhi, killed one of his greatest generals, devastated the surrounding country, and once trapped him in a fortified camp, and still they never took his capital or destroyed his sultanate. His commanders beat back invasion after invasion, and his military and economic reforms made Delhi far harder to attack. That doesn't make him a clean hero. He had murdered the uncle who trusted him. He ruled through fear and surveillance. He didn't save his kingdom out of mercy. He saved it because he understood power, how to seize it, how easily it could be lost, and how much violence and organization it took to keep. That may be the real reason he could stand against the Mongols. They were used to rulers who hesitated, armies that gathered too late, kingdoms split by frightened nobles. In Alauddin Khalji, they met a ruler who was suspicious before danger appeared, ruthless before mercy could weaken him, and willing to rebuild his entire state around the expectation of war. He was not the king who defeated Genghis Khan. Genghis had been dead for generations. He was the sultan who faced the world Genghis Khan left behind. And when that world came riding toward Delhi, Alauddin Khalji made sure Delhi was still standing when it left.